I will call this Tigard City Council meeting to order. City Recorder Carrier, please call roll.
Youth Councillor Vogel.
Here.
Councillor Shaw.
Here.
Councillor Singh.
Here.
Councillor Wolf.
Here.
Council President Hu.
Here.
Mayor Lube.
Here. If you will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. City Councilor Saff, any non-agenda items this evening?
Mayor and Council, we do ask that we go into executive session this evening. As you know, and the community knows, we typically have a placeholder there that say you may go into it, and we're recommending that we do go into executive session for real property at the conclusion of the open meeting.
Perfect. I want to officially welcome Youth Councilor Vogel to her first City Council meeting. Thank you. You're going to be great. And also just in general, I know that there were probably some general frustrations around our ordinance on fireworks with the red flag warning in effect and the use of, or the lack of use of fireworks and sale. And on our July 25th meeting is where the council will talk in detail about whether or not that ordinance law still makes sense, because I think it was probably a very frustrating situation for everybody involved. And so hopefully we can come to a better resolution when we bring it up at council. So if you have any ideas or any thoughts on fireworks in general, please send them to us so we can hear your opinions on them. Good, bad, all of the above. We'd love to hear how you feel about them so we can go into the council meeting a bit more informed. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, super frustrating probably for a lot of people. So we will move on to proclamations and recognition, and we will invite Public Works Engagement Coordinator Jessica Love to give the staff report. Welcome.
Good evening. So July is Park and Recreations Month, and it's celebrated nationwide. In Tigard, we use this as an opportunity to celebrate the 563 acres of parklands and open spaces that we have, our rapidly growing recreations program that's now 9 years old, and then our amazing park and recreations team members that are constantly working hard to make sure our parks are safe, clean, and available for our community to use, and then also coordinating amazing recreation programs that our community has grown to really love. In celebration of Park and Recreations Month, our recreations program is hosting our pop-up in the park events throughout the month of July, and we're also spotlighting the wide range of parks that we have available in Tigard to our community on our social media channels. Rick would like to pop on. He's visiting virtually and would like to say a few words as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Rick Gruen, Parks and Recreation Manager. And just wanted to say thank you, Council and our Parks and Rec Advisory Board for your continued support of Tigard Parks and Recreation and recognizing July as National Parks and Recreation Month. This year's theme, Where Community Grows, can really describe Tigard and what Tigard is all about, a place where Parks and Recreation helps make community connections. A recent National Recreation and Parks Association Park Pulse poll shows 87% of adults enjoy activities that make them feel connected to their local community. We see this every day and every week in our parks, from the farmers market at Universal Plaza to the many thousands of pickleball players at Summer Lake and our river enthusiasts trying to gain access to the river down at Cook Park, and our baseball and soccer tournaments that go on. These are just some of the, to name a few. Tigard Parks and Recreation will continue to provide safe and equitable access for all of our community to experience the benefits of parks and recreation and our programs and public offerings. And so I thank you for the opportunity to speak. And again, I appreciate all your support for Tigard Parks and Recreation and Parks and Recreation Month. Turn it back to you, Jess.
Thank you. So that's our recommendation, is to support Park and Recreations and go out and explore.
Thank you so much for being here and for providing the opportunity. As serving as the prior liaison to the Parks and Recreation Board for the last 4 years, I have a special spot in my heart for Parks and Recreation. And I think it also, when we look back at a lot of events that brought the community together and meant a lot and really put everybody together, those happen in our parks. From everything from the concerts in the parks to, the preparedness fair or the balloon festival or the farmers market, all of these sorts of things happen in our parks. And our parks wouldn't be what they are without our Parks and Recreation team and our Public Works Department. And so it's my honor to proclaim July as Park and Recreation Month. So yay. Everybody visit, a park this month. Maybe that's my challenge to all of our Tigard community members, to get everybody to visit a park this month.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
We will move on to public comment. If you'd like to phone in now for public comment to get in the queue, please do so. Our call-in 9 is 503-966-4101. And anyone wishing to give general comments should call in now. Anyone present wanting to give general comments, please sign up at the public comment form at the front of the room. And we will start with follow-up to previous public comment, and we have Assistant City Manager Tritch. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council, members of the community. My name is Emily Tritch. I'm Assistant City Manager for Investment and Infrastructure. We had one written comment submitted last week. The comment was with regard to inclusive language and demographic information, and that comment was responded to. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And next we have our Tigard Area Chamber of Commerce update, and we have the Chamber Board of Directors Chair Michelle Cheney here to give an update. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Lube and City Councilors. My name is Michelle Cheney, and I just got a new title at the Board of Directors, July 1. I am now past chair. We just voted in a new Board of Directors, and so I'd like to announce our new board chair is Tom Mingle, and our new chair-elect is Sarah Tanner. Sarah also doubles as the VP of Finance. We also have two new ambassador co-chairs, Tanya Christensen, who is also on the Board of Directors, and co-chair Greg Kozina. And we had a great annual meeting. We celebrated a lot of successes, including the installation of our new CEO, Megan DeSalvo, and we also shared our strategic plan report. For Leadership Tigard, we held our graduation on June 20th. We thank the mayor for speaking at that event, and we also congratulate Councilor Wolf on being a graduate of this cohort. It was a really meaningful celebration, and all of our graduates got to say what they enjoyed about the program, and we heard really wonderful things about it. And some of our graduates even said that it was the best professional development program they've ever attended. I am the chair of that program, and so that was especially meaningful to me to hear how much everyone appreciated it. We do have applications open now for the class for next year, and we encourage all of you to apply. We do have room for about 20 more students next year. And I would also like to thank the City of Tigard, who provides lunch for that program for all 9 sessions and also sends us a lot of their leaders to the program. So thank you for your support. For our education advocacy and building a strong local economy, we do have our DEI committee that meets July 19th. We also have a Government Affairs and Public Policy Committee. They are taking a break for the summer. They'll reconvene in September. And we do have a goal in 2024 to raise $10,000 for scholarships. And so if any of your businesses would like to support that, please let us know, and we'd be happy to add you to our roster. As far as promoting community, we have lots of ribbon cuttings that are on the calendar for over the summer. Please check our website if you'd like to attend any of those and welcome our new businesses to our community. We are also very proud of our multi-chamber meeting that we had at the Tiger Balloon Festival. We saw over 130 people attend from 6 local chambers, and so that was a great gathering place for us, and many of you attended, so thank you for that. As far as network and visibility, we have meetings every Thursday morning for Good Morning Tigard. The list is on our website, and we invite all of you to attend. And then we will also, like every Sunday from May through October, we'll also be celebrating our city's parks with our Tigard Farmers Market at the Plaza, Universal Plaza. We do have about 30 to 35 vendors each week. We have live music, lots of great things to see and do out there. We are also still accepting sponsorships for that event. Let's see. And lastly, we would just like to continue to thank the City of Tigard for partnering with us, and I would be happy to answer any questions if you have some.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? No? Seeing none, we appreciate your update.
All right, thank you.
Next item on our agenda is our police chief update with Chief McAlpine. Welcome. There was a lot of green this month.
There is. Thank you for noticing. Again, good evening, Chief Kathy McAlpine, Tigard Police Department. Normally, as you mentioned, Mayor, I would be in front of you giving the 4th of July statistics. But since we've put that off for a robust conversation on the 26th, which I appreciate, it does give me an opportunity to talk about June, which is our halfway. So where are we trending already in 2023? And if you recall, we ended 2022 with about 1,000 calls for service more than we did, and we were trying to see, is that the new normal? Is it an anomaly? So at the halfway mark, as the mayor indicated, I am proud to show that we are overall in persons crime, we are down 24%. Property crimes, we're down 15%, and societal crimes, we're down 1%. And with that, our dispatch calls for service right now, we're trending about 7% lower. But each month, it doesn't take much to tick it upwards, but we'll celebrate that. More importantly, I'd like to draw your attention to the self-initiated calls, because I do believe there's a correlation. When officers have time to work either problem areas, engaging, oftentimes we get people on warrants or we're interrupting some crimes, and I think there is a nexus to the increase in self-initiated calls to our reduction in crime. Not solely, not 100%, but historically there is usually a correlation. And then this month, for priority 1 and 2, we actually got under 6 minutes, which is, again, we're trying to get as low of the 5 minutes as we can, and we were at 5.72. So that's an overall highlight. Some of the things that we're still monitoring is in property crimes, our stolen vehicles. We're like the nation in the Kia and Hyundais that the TikTok released, and seeing the implosion, we're not immune to that. And so, and I think Kia is trying to do some fixes along those because it's on their end as far as the accessibility, and it was, I think, uncovered through those TikTok videos on how easy it is to access those vehicles and steal them. And some other things, we had fairly high disorderly conduct, and it's a mixture of domestic violence, bar fights, and then some of our unhoused at some of our businesses. So it's a combination of quite a few. And I think, one I wanted to share is, it's not up there, but we try and look at the photo enforcement. If you see on red light in Durham, on the Durham Road, it shows that we had more than 50% rejected. And so to me, that was an anomaly. Sought to find the cause of that, and they were able to look and say it was a series of the sun was shining so bright that the officer could not identify the driver, and so they had to be rejected at that time. That's usually sun is not our problem as far as being able to identify the driver, but in this series of offenses they were able to, so they had to reject him. And then we hope to come back in October or November to give this council a full briefing on where we're at with photo enforcement in the future on that. So happy to answer any questions at that time. And Youth Councilor Vogel, welcome.
Are there any questions for Chief McAlpine? So what was the TikTok thing? It's news to me.
If you just the automatic start, if you pull out the plug, it's just a USB port and they can access it. And so unfortunately, clubs are not the sole. They're going past the clubs of the steering wheel and just taking a steering wheel off and able to steal the cars. So it is across the country that word has gotten out, and we can thank social media and the TikTok to educate a lot of people on that. And like I said, I think they're looking to Kia and Hyundai to maybe do a remedy, but that exposed the vulnerability of those two models.
Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you for catching me up.
You're very welcome.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you for being here. Okay, next item on our agenda is written public comment. We received one comment by noon on Monday, and it was from Kimberly Shute. And the request is to please ban fireworks. They're dangerous to wildlife and pets and are so unpleasant to listen to and not worth the risk. And there's additional comments on it, but that's the gist of it. And next item on our agenda is we have in-person public comment, and we do have one person signed up today, Daniel Thompson of Tigard. Please come on up. You have 2 minutes, and I just ask, there's a button on the front of the microphone, and when it turns green, you're good to go.
I
Welcome.
have lived here, thank you. I've lived here for probably 40 years, and one of my concerns, and it seems to be an ongoing concern, is the roads and public transportation. I've attended several meetings. I just happened to find out about this meeting. I don't know why I'm not being notified. I've signed up for every board or every notification that I know of. But again, going back to my concern is that when road works or plans are made and they're in the planning stage, there tends to be a failure for the city of Tigard to really listen to the residents and take input. My one example I have is there was a meeting on the Hall Boulevard improvement, and there was an older lady who sat up in the front when this was in the planning stage, and the older lady had said, are they going to widen Hall Boulevard? And the person who was giving the presentation said, that's not an option, immediately shut that whole conversation down. And if this is a planning stage, then why are options being shut down and denied? So,
Thank you for your comment. Would you like to add your email address on here so I can have the city recorder confirm that we have you on notifications?
yes.
Okay. Mr. Thornburg, are there any phone callers in the queue or any requests to comment by video?
None at this time.
All right, thank you. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. The consent agenda is used for routine items, including minutes and approval of contracts or intergovernmental agreements. Information on each item is available on the city's website in the packet for this meeting. Thank you. Items may be enacted in one motion without separate discussion. Council members may request that an item be removed by motion for discussion and separate action. Tonight on our consent agenda, we have some meeting minutes from June 13th, June 20th, and June 27th. Is there any discussion or a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
The motion has been moved and seconded. City Recorder Krager, please conduct a roll call vote.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Councillor Singh,
Yes.
Councillor Wolf,
Yes.
Council President Hu,
Yes.
Mayor Lube.
Yes. And the motion passes by unanimous vote of the council. The next item on our agenda is the Hall Boulevard Corridor Conceptual Design Report Briefing. And we have Principal Transportation Planner Dave Roth and Consultant Dave Abe to give the staff report. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Lube and Tigard City Councilors. My name is Dave Roth. I'm Tigard's Principal Transportation Planner. And tonight I have with me Derek Abe from Alta Planning and Design. We'll be providing a presentation on the Hall Boulevard Corridor Visioning Project tonight. So I'm excited to share with you a preview of the Hall Boulevard Conceptual Design Report, the culmination of a significant body of work conducted over the past year. Upon completion, the CDR marks a major milestone in the city's ongoing campaign to take over jurisdictional ownership of Hall Boulevard, and more importantly, to move us toward an improved roadway that works well for community members of all ages and abilities, regardless of how they travel. Teammates will return later this summer or fall to seek a resolution in support of the CDR. Before I jump into the presentation tonight, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the people who've supported this project and related jurisdictional transfer work over the past several years. Current Tigard City Council, as well as past councilors and past mayors, our Tigard Transportation Advisory Committee, Tigard teammates, past and present, ODOT project partners, state legislative representatives, in particular Representatives Bowman, Neron, Nose, and Senator Woods, who championed two bills this past session, HB 2756, which would have resulted in the transfer of Hall Boulevard and a significant investment in state dollars, and HB 2793, the jurisdictional transfer bill, which was passed this past session, that will result in a process for transferring these state-owned roadways to local agencies. Congresswoman Bonamici and Salinas, who've secured federal investments for Hall Boulevard over the past couple years, and the Tigard community. Witnessing the level of interest and engagement in this project has been very gratifying. I should mention, however, that some of the passion we've seen has been driven by tragedy and trauma, and we should be reminded that safety is foundational to this work. So, without further ado, I will jump into the presentation. So you can go to the next slide, please. So tonight we'll be sharing the project overview and planning process, or I will be sharing those parts of the presentation, and then Derek will share with us the proposed improvements. Next slide. And I'll go ahead and cover the project overview now. If you could go to the next slide. So the Hall Boulevard Corridor Visioning Project defines a range of upgrades and safety improvements to allow residents and visitors of all ages and abilities to move throughout and across the corridor to meet their daily travel needs. Next slide. Owned and maintained by ODOT, Hall Boulevard has long been the source of community complaints and known deficiencies. In terms of repairs, with a history of minimal investment by the state, the city has long considered taking ownership of the road through a process known as a jurisdictional transfer to address a backlog of maintenance issues. And then in terms of improvements, we know that to meet the needs of our growing community, additional improvements beyond state of good repairs are critical. We also know that the community needed a voice in defining these needs, and we needed an effective tool to communicate the community vision to support the case for additional investments. Next slide. So this is our vision for the future corridor, and the vision and the conceptual design report really serve as a North Star for what the future of Hall Boulevard will look like in this community. The future Hall Boulevard should serve as an important asset and place for the community. The corridor must function well for users of all ages and abilities. It should promote safety, connect neighborhoods, and serve as a catalyst for new development opportunities along the corridor. Next slide. So I'll cover a few slides here on design principles and policies. So the city has numerous adopted policies and goals and a strategic vision that are all foundational to the types of improvements that we'll eventually one day see on Hall Boulevard. Starting with, well, let's just go ahead to the next slide here. Starting with the Complete Streets policy, which really comes down to making sure that our investments and our infrastructure serves all users regardless of age, ability, or mode of transport. Next slide. We also utilize data and information from our existing Transportation Safety Action Plan. Just a note there that we will be advancing a new updated Transportation Safety Plan for the city, which you'll hear from us in a couple weeks on. This really identifies critical improvement areas across the city where we're seeing higher incidences of crashes, and 2 of those locations are along Hall Boulevard. Before we go to the next slide, I'll also mention there's a little footnote there. Additional policy guidance comes from our 2040 Transportation System Plan, which was adopted in January of 22. And that document sets the future lane configuration of Hall Boulevard. So we have an adopted document, adopted plan that tells us how many lanes Hall Boulevard should be in the future. And then also the Tigard comprehensive plan is mentioned there as well. And just a note that transportation land use need to be integrated fully, and Hall Boulevard touches some really key land use areas in the city, such as downtown. Next slide. This slide documents both adopted council goals and the strategic vision elements that are supporting this work. And you know, we're talking about accessibility, walkability, equity, and safety here. Next slide. So given adopted policies, it should come as no surprise that walkability, connectedness, and equity serve as guiding principles for this project. We use these principles to evaluate and test the proposal documented in the conceptual design report, ensuring the concept design supports these principles. Next slide. So I'll talk a bit about the planning process. So let's go to the next slide. So in terms of existing conditions, and this provides a little bit of background, which is also described more fully in the agenda item summary for tonight. The city has conducted 2 prior condition assessments, starting with the first one in 2016 and then an update in 2019 to gain a better understanding of the liabilities associated with Hall Boulevard. So, you know, what would the city be taking on in terms of this asset if under city ownership? Over the past 2 years, the city and ODOT have partnered in developing an agreement on what's known as a state of good repair cost estimate. This is the amount of funding needed to fix what's out there today. And I'll just mention that the 2019 assessment report served as the real kickoff for that relationship and conversation with ODOT, and it was a very effective tool in getting our partners at ODOT to move on this and prioritize this in their own work plans. So again, this is the base level investment needed, and it amounts to $30 million if it were implemented today, independent of other needed improvements. The work plan between ODOT and Tigard is documented in a memorandum of understanding, which we signed with them about 2 years ago now. Next slide. So in terms of public engagement on the project, this really falls into sort of two rounds. So we built off of the existing conditions work, and we brought that out to the community to share with them what we knew about the roadway and to hear from them what sorts of issues they're having in their day-to-day use of Hall Boulevard from whatever perspective they may have as a neighbor, somebody driving the corridor, somebody trying to walk across the corridor, transit user, et cetera. This round one consisted of a virtual open house due to COVID restrictions, and we had an online input map, and you see an image there of what that looks like. And we also conducted stakeholder interviews. During round two, we refined, we brought out some early proposals and refined those through a second in-person open house that was held here in Town Hall, and this was, I think, our first open house in person post-COVID, or at least mine in a couple of years. So it was kind of nice to actually engage with the community in person. We also held another online input map for 2 weeks after that open house where people could submit comments. Further, we shared monthly updates and took feedback from TTAC. We also had numerous one-on-one discussions with interested community members, both in person and over the phone and email. And I should also highlight that our engagement activities were underway during significant media attention on Hall Boulevard. We were conducting walks with elected officials and community leaders, visits by state and federal lawmakers, and then it was also happening during significant state legislative action on the House bills that I mentioned previously. Okay, next slide. So we took the information we received from the public during our engagement process and developed some concepts. So again, these were informed by both the existing conditions analysis and work and the feedback we were receiving. We generated design alternatives, refined those with public input, and the planning process then resulted in a high-level concept based on both the guiding principles and the feedback that we were receiving. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Derek to move us forward through the actual concepts that will be in the CDR.
Thanks, Dave. Next slide, please. Okay, so as Dave kind of explained earlier, the CDR, the Concept Design Report, is the culmination of this body of work that we've been working through over the last year, and is really intended to define and summarize our process and the concepts that we are proposing moving forward to address all of the goals and objectives that Dave laid out earlier. Really, this document is aimed at giving folks a really great idea of the potential for the corridor in response to all of the safety needs, the connectivity needs, the access needs, and the comfort needs, right? The experience of folks along the corridor today and what we want that to be in the future. So we're really trying to capture that vision and that excitement for what this corridor, Hall Boulevard, could function as tomorrow. It contains a lot of the things you see here on the list, but again, focusing on the proposal, on the recommendations, and then we've got a series of some very high-level, planning-level cost estimates associated with those improvements. So I'm going to walk through the corridor itself to describe and sort of summarize the types of improvements that you'll find when we deliver the report in a few months. Next slide. All right, and we can go to the next one. Okay, so the way that we're going to explain this evening is to try to break down this entire corridor into a number of segments. And those segments are defined by both what's out there today in terms of transportation facilities, but also the land use context. What are the types of destinations that folks want to access along each of these segments? What are some of the tricky or sort of challenging facilities that may be out there today that we need to think about with these improvements in mind. We want to create a context for each of these segments that's really going to be responsive to the needs and the future improvements that we think are suitable out there. So for each of these segments, we're gonna show you a proposed cross section, and we call this a typical cross section because it isn't intended to represent, you know, every square inch of that segment, but is really intended to give you a good idea of what you can expect for most of that extent. So I'll welcome comments as we go through this, or we can take them at the end, but just want to kind of lay that out for you as we walk through each of these. Additionally, we'll spend some time talking about some of the concepts that we'll see throughout the corridor, just so you have a more general understanding of what those might entail. So we've got the cross sections. I do also want to call out a number of locations along the corridor where we've given a little bit more thought to what types of improvements would be suitable and what we think would be ideal given the conditions on the ground today. All right, so as you can see here, the cross-section, this is just one representative cross-section, but a fairly representative cross-section of the entire corridor, where we have a vehicle travel lane in each direction. We've got a center turn lane, a two-way left turn lane there in the center. And then we've got some facilities for folks that are walking, biking, and rolling on either side of the street. And so you can think of it as a fairly symmetrical cross-section. There is one segment that we'll get into a little bit later that deviates from this a bit, but for the most part, you can expect to see some variation of this throughout. All right, so let's dive in. Go to the next slide. And I'll also mention, you know, the dimensions that you can see if you squint and you zoom in here a little bit are really sort of intended as a starting point, a baseline for what we consider to be an appropriate dimension for each of those zones, let's call them. And they could be wider, and in some cases they might need to be narrower, but we wouldn't want to make them so narrow as to compromise the experience, the safety, or the comfort of users in each of these zones. Next slide. Okay, so talk a little bit about the extents of the entire corridor. So we're going all the way from Durham Road in the south, north to Locust Street, to the city line. We're defining 4 different study segments, so we've got 4 typical cross-sections that we'll talk about. And then in addition to that, we're identifying a number of intersection treatments, intersection improvements, and crossing recommendations, typically in locations where we don't have a marked crossing or some kind of enhanced crossing treatment for pedestrians to cross the street today. So the idea here is that even though we've got 4 discrete segments, we need there to be a level of consistency, a level of continuity between these segments. So there's going to be, as I mentioned earlier, a degree of similarity between them, because we want that to be as intuitive, as understandable as possible. As Dave mentioned, this is really about multimodal facilities. We want to provide options, travel options for different people, regardless of how they're getting around, right? So that includes access to transit facilities, that includes turn lanes, that includes protected bike lanes and wider sidewalks. It includes all of those things. We want to accommodate the variety of modes in a way that is, again, going to provide for not just a safe experience, but a comfortable one as well. And then lastly, you know, there are going to be a lot of opportunities along the corridor to think about how we landscape it, how we make it much more conducive to managing stormwater, to thinking about sewer infrastructure, Because again, we're trying to accrue as many benefits as possible, as many of these environmental benefits that spill over into the user experience, right? Creating a more attractive place, creating a walking environment that is buffered from the street itself. So we're providing that additional sort of environmental lens to our recommendations here. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about, for each of these segments, some spot improvements. But before we do that, I want to explain a little bit about what we mean when we use some of this terminology. So you're going to hear and see the term protected intersections. And I don't know if that's a concept that you're all familiar with, but just in case you're not, this is a fairly new design of intersections, the physical design of intersections to better accommodate people walking and biking. It has a lot of additional benefits, efficiency benefits for vehicular traffic as well. But this is a design that it really came about because we want to create a safer and a more comfortable environment for all of these road users and the interactions that occur at intersections, right? Intersections are the location where we see the most crashes, the most conflicts, and so we want to address that. And so the diagram at the bottom there is a depiction of some of the elements of a protected intersection. Without going into too much detail, I'll just say that this is a design that can be adapted to a lot of different conditions, to a lot of different conflict types, to a lot of different issues that we see at each intersection. So they're not all going to look exactly like that, but variations on a theme there. So that's what I mean when I say protected intersection. There are going to be a couple of locations where we're talking about bridge improvements or bridge replacements. Those are fairly intuitive, but again, the idea there is that we want to ensure that that bridge, that structure, is going to support the same cross-section, the same facilities that are on either end of it, right? To the extent possible. There are, of course, limitations with a lot of that, but we want that to be predictable. In some cases, we're talking about a roadway configuration that would realign some streets so that we've got a more traditional four-way intersection that all users of that particular intersection are going to understand. That is going to increase the efficiency of the vehicular movements, of people trying to cross the street on with just walking across the crosswalk or using their bikes, whatever it may be. So there are a number of key intersection improvements that will have a much greater physical impact, a realignment in this case. And then lastly, there are a number of signal timing improvements. These are fairly straightforward recommendations that we can propose that will look at optimizing the flow of traffic through those traffic signals, right? In a way that is going to benefit everyone in terms of how much time they have to wait and the predictability of those traffic operations at those intersections, to the likelihood that a person would comply or not comply with that traffic signal. So there are a number of signal timing improvements that we'll be recommending as well. Okay, so that's an overview of the improvement types, and now I'm going to walk through each of those segments, call out some of those locations. Next slide. And this is just another visualization to convey some of those improvement types. This is at the top there a rendering of that realignment of the Hunziker-Scoffings intersection. One potential option that we would consider where Hunziker is shifted further south to meet the existing location of Scoffins there. There isn't so much detail there as to propose what would happen outside of that right-of-way, but you can see there that the general cross-section, again, is fairly consistent along Hall Boulevard. 3 lanes, some bike facilities, some landscaping, and some wider sidewalks. So this is, of course, a location that has been studied to to greater depths in previous efforts, including the Southwest Corridor Conceptual Design Report. Next slide. Okay, so the first segment, the north segment, will go from top to bottom here, is a fairly straightforward one, actually. And we're talking about Locust to the north, all the way down to Highway 99 there. Again, the cross-section is 3 lanes, a lane in each direction, a center turn lane where it's needed, and in this case, it's along most of the corridor. Some landscaping, a buffer with some plantings and some trees, what we're calling a cycle track or a raised protected bike lane, so that's a bike facility that's at the sidewalk level, adjacent to a sidewalk on both sides of the street. So that's the general cross-section, the typical cross-section for what amounts to about an 80-foot right-of-way, an envelope from edge to edge. So you can see, if you look at the call-outs on the right, a number of enhanced crossing opportunities, so adding marked crosswalks, adding potentially curb extensions, or in some cases a median refuge island. And in a couple of instances, rectangular rapid flashing beacon. So this is a beacon that I'm sure you're all familiar with. It has a very bright, very attention-getting pattern, very high compliance rate, very good tool in our toolkit. Most of those crossings are proposed at locations along the corridor in this north section where we don't have a crossing today. And the idea there is that we're trying to provide a crossing opportunity at a reasonable distance from the next closest crossing opportunity, typically at a traffic signal, right? So that, you know, folks aren't trying to run across the street. They've got a well-established place where they can make that crossing safely and comfortably. Sort of bookending this northern segment is the intersection of Locust, and then of course the intersection of Highway 99. And at each of those locations, we want to study what a protected intersection could look like. Really kind of treating that as a gateway treatment of sorts for this segment of the corridor. So those are the major improvements that we're considering for this northern segment. Oh, and lastly, I'll mention, you can see item number 6 there on the list. It doesn't have a call out for the improvement type. This is a location I think you're all very familiar with. It's the entrance to the shopping center right near Joann Fabric. Shrinks down to 2 lanes. It's very narrow. There's a bus stop there. We recently added a median island for pedestrians. Very tricky location. We've witnessed a lot of bad behavior at that location, and it is a spot that we are identifying as a need for additional study and some key interventions there. Next slide. Okay, so this is just a rendering of what the intersection of Spruce and Hall could look like. And we're introducing some of those protected intersection elements here. We've got a median refuge island, that rectangular rapid flashing beacon there on the poles with the signage. And you can see how that would look in that streetscape, in that given right-of-way that we have to work with there. So just a potential a rendering of some of the potential improvements that we might see at that location. Next slide. Okay, so the central segment is one we divided into 2 segments as we got further along in our process. So we're calling this northern central segment A, and the one to the south of this would be central segment B, which we'll go to next. But this is an interesting one because we're in the downtown now. We've crossed Highway 99 and we're heading south. Here we've got a number of issues with the segments along, I guess it's north of call out number 10 here, let's call that, north of Knoll, where you know, we're receiving a lot of traffic off of 99. You know, a lot of that traffic is turning and heading to destinations, heading to downtown. And some of that traffic is just using it as a bypass, right? One way to address the flow of traffic and making it more predictable along this segment is to think about how we reconfigure the lanes that we have out there today, the orientation of those lanes, and how they're really functioning. And so some of the improvements we're proposing along this stretch include removing things like the slip lane at Highway 99. That's a channelized turn lane that allows higher speed vehicle turns, right, onto Hall Boulevard. Controlling the access points to certain properties and to certain side streets to again create a more predictable environment for vehicles that are turning onto Hall Boulevard or turning off of Hall Boulevard. Additionally, we want to create you know, more crossing opportunities again, right? So between Highway 99 and Hunziker, we don't really have a good marked crossing. We don't really have a great crossing opportunity that's comfortable, and it's something that we've identified an important need for along this stretch. So introducing new crossings, enhancements to those crossings, and rethinking the need for certain turn lanes that are underutilized today. We talked about the Scoffins-Hunziker realignment. You know, at a minimum, we're looking at improvements to the signal operations at that intersection that will likely come with proposed geometric improvements to make the turning movements more predictable and overall operation of that intersection better for people regardless of the mode that they're using. One other thing I'll say about that intersection is it is one that we've identified as a potential for future study to look at the feasibility of a roundabout there. And that is a strategy that has its trade-offs, but is one that we think could work and would offer potential benefits in the way of efficiency for the intersection itself. So traffic operations through the intersection, and of course safety and connectivity across Hall Boulevard. As we get further down to Commercial Street, again, you know, this is another potential location for a gateway treatment, right? Commercial Street leads to the transit center, leads to the downtown, and we want to make that not only a safe and comfortable environment, but an attractive one that really welcomes folks, that makes it clear, it establishes we're entering the downtown. This is sort of the southern portal, if you will. So that's the central segment A. We'll go to central segment B next. Go to the next slide. So this stretches from Commercial all the way down to O'Mara, kind of near the library there. And this is a segment that is probably the most different from the other three. And so you can see at the cross section there, what we're showing is a wider sidewalk. We're showing instead of a directional or one-way bike facility, we've got a two-way bike facility on that side of the street. And that's buffered by some generous landscaping, some plantings from the roadway itself. On the other half of that cross-section, you'll see it's more or less what we've got today. It's a bike lane that's striped on the street, and then we've got a sidewalk. And so the idea here is that we want to concentrate a lot of the activity, a lot of the walking, biking, rolling activity in particular, on that west side of the street, on the west side of the Hall. And the thinking behind that is really twofold. We want to really emphasize that side of the street because, A, that's the side of the street where we've got the majority of destinations. That's the side of the street where we've got City Hall, we've got the skate park, we've got the Fountain Creek Trail, right? And then the portal to access to downtown. So thinking that that would provide that all ages and abilities facility for folks who are connecting through the downtown and to the south. Now, you might ask yourself, why are we also providing a bike lane in the northbound direction? Why would we still provide that? And the idea there is to provide some redundancy. That is a facility that is often going to serve people on bikes who are a lot more confident, who are already doing that today, and who maybe, you know, are looking for a more direct kind of route. And so we want to keep that. We want to offer some of that redundancy there. This is a change in the cross section, and so we want to be really careful, really thoughtful about how we transition on either end of this segment. If we went with a cross section that looked like this, we would want to be sure that where this ends, it's very easy to understand what happens next, right? If we're asking people to go from one side of the street to the other side of the street, that activity is happening in a single location in a very predictable way. Okay, so we're giving a lot of thought to that. The other thing I'll mention is we've got a rail crossing. We want to be really thoughtful about how that functions for all the users in the streets, but in particular the folks that are crossing those tracks and you know, are going to need some certainty that they're not going to slip or trip or get stuck in them. You know, obviously we want that to be a clear space, a clear zone. We don't want anyone having any incidences in or around that track location. So again, thoughtful design as to what would happen on the ground there. We've got the bridge improvements over Fano Creek. You'll see that this cross section extends across that bridge and provides a continuous facility where we don't have one today. So that's pretty key. In addition, as we go further south, you know, we're looking at how and where to kind of bring folks back over to the east side. And we think that O'Mara, the Tigard Library, is going to be that location, that key location to kind of concentrate that activity. All right, how are we doing on time? Okay. So with that, I'm going to advance us over to the last segment, the southern segment here. Oh, before that, here's a rendering of the looking south towards what we presume would be the location of a new bridge and continuous facilities across that. You've got your two-way bikeway on, this time it's on the right side of the screen. That's still the west side. And then you've got, you know, the additional bike lane and sidewalk facilities on either side. So just to give you an idea, things do narrow down at this location, so it goes from the 3 lanes to a 2-lane cross section. Obviously on a bridge you're not doing any turning movements, but the idea here is we would hold the rest of those facilities, the rest of those zones constant. Next slide. Okay, so that's again another view of that typical cross section. Next slide. Okay, so this brings us to the last segment, the south segment, stretching all the way from O'Mara down to Durham Road. And so you can see here that we're returning to that more symmetrical cross section. You'll find that in some places we're going to deviate from this because we've got a little bit more space to work with. And then in some locations in this segment, we actually have to narrow it a little bit because we've got more physical constraints. The actual width of the roadway and the right-of-way begin to shrink down, and so we want to be really thoughtful about how we do that without compromising the function of each of these pedestrian, bicycle, and roadway facilities. So in some cases, maybe that buffer is going to shrink a little bit. In some cases, the center turn lane might go away. And in other cases, the sidewalk might shrink a little bit, right? But we want to provide, again, a facility that is going to function and be intuitive and continuous as much as we can. So here, many of the improvements that we're calling out are new crossing opportunities. This is a segment of roadway where those marked crossings, those enhanced crossings, are a lot fewer and further between. So we've thought a lot about where to locate them. Again, trying to give them a predictable interval, so spacing between crossings. And spacing between signals, just so that folks have a general sense of where their next crossing opportunity might be, without having to think about, oh, do I jaywalk? Do I run across the street? Because it's easier, right? Make it predictable, make it understandable, and make it very clear for all of the road users where that activity is going to happen. The other thing I want to mention about those crossing locations is that they've been located in places where we actually have a lot of great pedestrian connectivity to the neighborhoods, where we don't necessarily have a side street, right? We have some cut-throughs, we have some nice pedestrian pathways that actually lead to Hall Boulevard and provide a really great way for folks to cross east-west or to make it to Hall and walk to their destination. So being really mindful about not just what's happening along the corridor, but how it's enabling connections across the corridor is really, really important. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the segment between McDonald and Bonita. This is the highest volume, most congested segment of Hall Boulevard in our study area. It's one that we've observed, we know what the issues are, and what it boils down to is, we need to rethink what happens at each of those intersections. We need to think about the traffic operations, how they're currently breaking down, and what we might do to optimize that. So these are locations, again, that we've considered for some of those protected intersection improvements. These are locations that we'd want to also entertain the possibility of roundabouts at, again, to enhance the efficiency of those improvements, minimize delay, make the crossings more predictable, and optimize the flow of all of the traffic that's going through each of them, right? And that's gonna, when we make those improvements, that's gonna respond to the demands that are placed on that segment today, and in the future as well, right? So that is a key stretch that we wanna look closer at. And then that's gonna bring us all the way down to Durham Road, where we're connecting to Cook Park, we're connecting to the schools, the high school, the elementary, and really thinking about where folks are going at that southern terminus of our study area. So there are a number of crossing improvements, protected intersection elements that we're imagining as a part of that southern terminus as well. Next slide. I think it might be a visualization of that last segment. Yeah. So there again, you can see a lot of crossing improvements, some identified locations for those protected intersections, and then again, when we get to the end here, we want to make sure that folks are going to have a really clear way to make that transition. Okay, so I think that's the last of the, oh, there we go. So there's another typical cross-section. That's the last of the improvement slides we've got. The next few slides, if you could advance to the next one, it's going to give a quick rundown of the costs that we've generated. Again, very high-level, planning-level cost estimates that are really only intended to give us a rough understanding of the ballpark, what is this going to cost? And the relative measure of the construction costs, so those capital costs, to things like design and engineering. We've factored in a healthy contingency as a part of that. And then when you add that up together, so that's the 61 million in construction costs, hard costs, with the 52 million in soft costs, let's call them, the grand total is in the rough, kind of order of magnitude, 113 million. It's a big number. And I'll say that, with that 40% contingency, it's going to be a big number because we're so far early in this stage of planning that, we would need much further design and study to kind of refine that and to hone in on a more specific target. So contingency is big, and that contributes to that higher cost there. So that 113 million, again, big number, but it does not account for the 30 million in the state of good repair that Dave had mentioned earlier. So potentially, there's a lot of overlap there for us to think strategically about how we could apply that 30 million in state of good repair funding to some of the improvements that we're identifying as a part of this process. So again, that 113 is separate from the state of good repair amount. Yep, next slide. So I think we're just about done here. Some final steps. If you want to bring
I can jump in. Thanks, Derek. So over the next couple months, we'll be finalizing the conceptual design report, and it'll be good to hear some feedback from you, and we can take feedback tonight and also additional feedback later. We'll return to City Council later this summer or early fall, seeking a resolution in support of the CDR. That will help us down the road if we're going after federal grants or other funding sources to try to implement some of the improvements that you see in the CDR. We'll be continuing our work on the jurisdictional transfer of Hall Boulevard, continuing our partnership with ODOT, and setting up our strategy over the next couple of years, getting ready for the next year and a half, really, getting ready for the next long legislative session where we anticipate there being a larger transportation package where Hall could conceivably be kind of at the top of the list for a transfer. And then we'll also be identifying funding opportunities that we can go after to implement some of those improvements. So with that, I think we're at the end of our presentation and happy to take a few questions. I know we're a little bit over time, so I think.
It's okay.
Right.
That doesn't bother me. Do you have any questions, Councillor Singh?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. That was really excellent. I have two questions or comments. I'm interested in learning more about like the fatalities, traffic injuries, and crashes along the corridor, and if you all have been examining like the trends over time with the improvements. So that's one thing I'm curious about, if you all have been examining that. And then the other thing was if there's been any discussion or ideas around climate resiliency, specifically around like, urban heat islands and flooding, if there's going to be like bioswales or planning around like types of trees along the corridor. Those are just some ideas or questions I had, so thanks.
Yeah, I'm happy to, I'll start with the safety question first. So our existing transportation safety action plan identified a couple of locations on Hall Boulevard that are really high crash locations. So we are monitoring that. We did have a fairly high profile pedestrian fatality in March of last year on Hall Boulevard at Spruce approximately. And the design treatments that you've seen tonight are really sort of the best practices in terms of addressing those safety issues. And safety is a really high priority for a project like this. Yeah. And then second question around climate resiliency, I think there's the factors related to the transportation sector generally. We know that that's responsible for about 30% of our climate emissions locally and state. It's pretty similar. And a project like this, if implemented, creates those opportunities for people to choose alternatives to driving, where they have better opportunities to walk, ride bikes, access transit, just creates a more viable way to get around other than driving a single occupancy vehicle. And then you mentioned heat islands, stormwater considerations, flooding. I might lean on Derek to respond to the bioswales and those sorts of things.
Yeah, generally I think the answer to that would be yes. You know, we're too early along in the process to know exactly where those bioswales would be, but yeah, we would want to definitely look for those opportunities where they present themselves. And we've thought a little bit about what's on the street today and the context for things like bioswales, for retention ponds, and then of course all of the landscaping that is really going to help to reduce that heat island effect that you mentioned. So yeah, I would say yes to all of that. Yeah.
Council President Hu?
Thank you, Mayor. Great presentation as well. I've been biking between City Hall and Cook Park and Hall recently, so I appreciate all the attention to detail in everything you discussed. So I have question on two main topics. One is protected intersection versus roundabout. You talk about roundabout potentially in two cross sections. So my impression has always been that roundabout is safer. Is that safer than protected intersection?
It's a good question, and it's highly context dependent, and there are a lot of different variations of roundabouts that you can construct and employ, and there are a lot of different ways that you can do protected intersections. So the devil is really in the details, and it comes down to the corner. It comes down to the number of lanes. It comes down to the number of cross streets and turning movements that you're dealing with at each location. The setback of the crossings, the visibility of the crossings. Generally, if we're talking about a four-legged roundabout, single lane four-legged roundabout, you're going to have less conflict points with motor vehicles at those pedestrian crossing locations than a traditional four-way signalized intersection. So they have their trade-offs. They have their trade-offs in terms of safety benefits, in terms of comfort, in terms of traffic operations, and it really depends on the location and what you're anticipating is going to, the types of activity that you're anticipating or that you're already dealing with today.
So those two locations identified are the best potential locations for roundabout.
We think roundabouts could work at each of those locations.
All right.
At least in our preliminary study, one of those trade-offs is roundabouts take a lot of space physically. They take a lot of space.
Yeah.
So whether or not that's actually feasible is the subject of further study. But yeah, they do have their safety benefits, their efficiency benefits.
Okay, thank you. And the second question I have is about center turning lane. It looks like, based on the design or the report, that it will be throughout most of the hall. Is that the intent, or?
I think that's an accurate statement. I think it will vary depending on the turning movements and the operations that we're expecting at each location. So in some cases, it might just be a turn lane in one direction. And then on the opposite side of that intersection or cross street, you might have a median refuge island, right? So it may not be that exact configuration for the entire segment, but generally, you're gonna see 3 lanes. In some cases, it might go down to 2. In some cases, you might have an additional turn lane,
Right.
So it kind of depends on the location as well.
Well, my understanding is that when there's like a island in between 2 lanes, it's a visual cue for drivers to slow down. Since the purpose to make things safer,
It is.
I do have concern that it's 3 lanes everywhere. So are you considering putting a center island even at places that's not crossings, so you could slow people down visually?
Potentially. Yeah, potentially, and you're absolutely right. It has a traffic calming effect when you narrow the road, when you you constrain the physical space that we have as drivers to operate in it. The narrower it is, the slower we're going to go. And when you add things like medians, and when you make those medians refuges for people to cross, you're creating a much calmer environment that is not only going to be safe, but more comfortable and attractive.
Right. Yeah. Because if we just have speed limit sign there, and without much enforcement, and let's be honest, our police can be everywhere. So we do need some sort of design feature to force people to slow down, or at least to at the speed level, speed limit, right? So it will be safe. So if you can consider, I will be more comfortable if there are more center lane, not center lane, but the center island, so people have a visual cue at least at a high crash corridor to at least slow down a little bit. So that, I think that would be, even better. So, but overall, I think this is a great presentation, and I wish it's already like that when I bike, but I can always look forward to it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
Great, thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. Quite beautiful and nice to see with the amount of biking and pedestrian access. Couple of questions. One is on the turnabout. As someone who walks quite a bit, turnabouts can be completely unsafe for a pedestrian, and very concerned it's at Bonita and also McDonald, which are very heavily concentrated, both mainly left and right on Bonita, but also left and right on McDonald. So that, I'd say, is the report, I know it's a design report, but do you account for how many cars are at those intersections? And are you going to account for how many cars, period, are on haul that travel daily? And also, will your report also then indicate how many cars would potentially then drive on 99 that may not have the same kind of built-in mechanisms to slow cars down, but that necessarily isn't potentially friendly for pedestrians? So it's the first question. Second is, are you going to have a timeline within this report? Because part of the concern I have is a lot of people don't understand that a lot of this money will come in 2025 when the Oregon legislature has a long session. And so I'm wondering if you have a time frame or a timeline that you could also include within the design report. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So we do account for, I think that first question sort of had two questions in it. So I'll start with the first around safety. So back to Derek's point about the devil's in the details, there are ways to design roundabouts that are safe for pedestrians, and I think we've learned a lot over the last couple decades now that we've seen more and more roundabouts being installed in the United States. There's a really good example in Springfield, Oregon, of a relatively new roundabout that includes RRFBs at the crossing locations, and it's got all of the design details to really increase visibility of pedestrians. And so those are the sorts of things that you would see in a future project here if we were to do a roundabout in the city. Second question was around traffic volumes and potential diversion to other streets. Our TSP outlines traffic volumes. I think it's pretty easy for us to translate some of that stuff into the conceptual design report, so I think we'll be able to do that. I'll just note that right now Hall Boulevard maxes out at about 14,500 vehicles a day, average daily traffic, which is quite reasonable for if it were just a two-lane or a two-lane plus a center turn lane cross section. Typically you can accommodate somewhere around 20 to 22,000 vehicles per day on a road like that. So, and the goal is to make sure that drivers are driving at a reasonable speed, not necessarily to slow down their movement through the corridor. In fact, I think some of the treatments and the ideas that we're talking about tonight can create a more reliable travel time for the corridor. And so that's what we would be striving for, is more reliability and fewer stops and starts and getting stuck in queues at signals, those sort of things. And then the last question was around timing. Yes, we can definitely include some language in the CDR talking about well, what is a realistic time frame for this? So, you know, assuming funding comes in through the state in the 2025 legislative session, and we go after a big federal grant, you know, this project will never be done in one fell swoop. This would be phased project, phased work, and I think we'll talk about that in terms of what that looks like, and just how realistic it is. You know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Councilor Wolf.
Also, thank you both, and great conversation, questions, and I think the only thing that I would have to add with the timeline, a little bit of the sticker shock, right, of the work that's been done to try to accomplish confirming 30 million to get good repair, as opposed to 130 million to really make this puppy go. So I think my question too is, you know, we have clear priorities around walkability, safety, and how we move traffic, but then also will there be priorities of this is what could go, you know, back to that timeline. We don't want it to be 10 years because we're trying to, you know, hit all these pieces, and then of course then the project doubles in cost because of the length of time. But very exciting, and just appreciate the conversation, but also very interested in what might be some of those decisions that will have to be made to really have a reasonable timeline and execute on the top priorities. But thank you so much for the report.
Thank you.
Youth Councilor Vogel, do you have any questions? Okay. I got lots of questions. The first is, I know, Mr. Ath, you were talking about in the beginning sort of that Hall is set to be, in theory, like a 2-lane travel road, and it's in the transportation system plan. To Mr. Thompson's question, can you talk about how in the plan Hall arrived at being a 2-lane road and that it wasn't chosen to be widened at any point? Can you give more context on that?
Yeah, when we were doing the 2040 transportation system plan process, we developed a number of priorities for the transportation system plan, very similar to what you heard about tonight in terms of community livability, safety, environment, mobility, et cetera, so on and so forth. And we looked at a number of our planned future cross-sections in Tigard and measured those against some of these priorities that we were developing and hearing from the community. And we identified a couple of roads, in fact, where we decided that the planned cross-section would essentially maintain where we were at today and not expand to a 5-lane future urban arterial cross-section. And one of the major factors around that, well, number one, I already mentioned that Hall Boulevard has plenty of capacity at its current cross-section into the future, aside from some of the operational issues that we have well documented at Bonita, McDonald, Durham. So plenty of capacity in its current configuration. But perhaps a more important factor is that these 5-lane urban arterials are the locations where we have, in not just in the Portland metro region, but essentially everywhere, where we have the worst traffic crashes, transportation issues, especially for vulnerable roadway users. And that's because you have multiple lanes that people have to get across or navigate, and it creates a real safety problem that's very difficult to address. So it's much safer to keep it at a smaller cross-section for the community.
I mean, it's exciting to hear that some of these measures will help move along quickly because, I mean, even as somebody who drives Hall every day, right, like it can get frustrating to stop and stop and stop and see, you know, anyone who has been on Hall around, even 4 o'clock, seeing the line back up for McDonald. I mean, I'd never thought about a roundabout in that area, but thinking about the traffic pattern constantly moving, like the opportunities are exciting. So how does the Hall 217 bridge replacement fit into this concept plan?
So that's a great question. So the bridge as designed by ODOT right now the cross-section is sufficient to provide, I think, what you've seen here tonight, but it won't have the level of grade separation or quite the level of protection that we're talking about for other sections. It's going to be slightly wider than what exists today, and we'll have much wider sidewalks on both sides of the road. The bike facility itself, the protection would have to be achieved with like delineator posts or something like that on the striping, and it would be a buffered bike lane, but not incompatible with kind of the overall concept you've seen here.
Okay. Can you get into a little bit more detail perhaps on how this translates to supporting public transportation more? You know, we've sort of talked about it briefly, but just we've talked a lot about pedestrian safety and bikes and those sorts of things, but not really about public transportation.
Yeah, so a couple of ways. One is just simply through coordination with TriMet, which is our public transportation provider in the Portland metro region. So just as an example, the cross-section rendering that you saw on the presentation tonight at Spruce, that actually is a funded project now. That new pedestrian crossing treatment will be implemented in the next couple of years. And we've already been coordinating with TriMet a bit on trying to figure out how we can improve the transit stop that is right there today. So improving and coordinating transit stops with this project and making sure that the transit stops align with the new proposed crossings. I mean, that's kind of the biggest thing, because you don't want somebody having to cross the road when they get off the bus without having an improved crosswalk on the road. And just to a point that Derek brought up earlier, interestingly, on the sort of the southern section, there are these existing pedestrian connections to the neighborhoods on both sides of the street, and we would work to create crossings at those locations and to potentially locate or relocate transit stops at those places.
Got it. So my next question, I guess my next set of questions are all kind of one question or comment in a grand kind of way to sort of talk about funding opportunities and phasing opportunities, and even talking about like enhanced crosswalk opportunities. Are those areas in which perhaps like the phasing would happen, you know, or would it be like, you know, the north section gets built and then the south section, or is it like, you know, the crossings or something that will come later? I guess I'm just wondering sort of what the phased would look like and how that might work.
Yeah, I think that's
we're talking big picture here.
Yeah,
I'm not looking for details.
Well, you know, just as another example that I can throw out is that when during the last legislative session, when sort of at the end of the session, Representative Bowman was able to find $3 million to put towards Hall Boulevard, which is great. It's a much smaller amount of money than we were hoping to see, but it's great that we saw some funding. We actually looked to Alta's work, and we said, where is an important location to get a new pedestrian crossing with that $3 million? And we provided a location to ODOT from this body of work to share with them. This is where we would like to see a crossing. So as we go forward, there's sort of the big picture, like large sums of money that we are hoping to secure through the state or through a federal grant, where we can do large chunks of this work. Phasing TBD, I think there's a lot of factors in determining the phasing, but along the way, we will continue to find these smaller funding opportunities, and this can be our guide to how and where we implement improvements with smaller investments along the way.
Yeah, no, I guess I would say my only last comment is I know, you know, it's wonderful that we're receiving bits of money. I don't want to call $3 million a bit of money, but when you're looking at, you know, 140, it is a little bit. And I also want us to be smart about what we're doing and not fixing an intersection just to turn around in 5 years to scrape it up and replace it. And so I want to make sure what we're building now, we're being responsible about and very thoughtful, which it sounds like we are, just making sure that what we're building will fit in and not need to be replaced in the future.
And one of the reasons why it's so important to have something like this on the books, so that we can start incrementally working towards it without doing unnecessary throwaway work.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. Did anybody's questions bring up anybody's additional questions for anybody else? No? It looks really cool. Looks like a road I'd want to be on, you know? So thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is the Tigard Resilience Update, and we have Project Planner Gary Pagenstacker here to give the report. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Loop and City Councilors. I'm Gary Pagenstacker, Project Planner with the Community Development Department. With me tonight for this item is Kevin Cole, the Tigard Facilities Manager, and Karina Hirschberg with PAE Consulting Engineers. They're here to hopefully answer questions you have after my presentation, and will come up and join me if that's the case. I hope to keep this presentation to 15 minutes and leave a generous 15-minute question and answer period. The presentation on this presentation on the feasibility of microgrids in Tigard is an introduction to the project, with the findings and conclusions of the feasibility study still in progress. We intend to come back this fall with what we've learned and implementation recommendations for your consideration. I'll start with some background, why we're doing this, who's involved, and then look more closely at what the three-tier structure of the initiative is. The council packet included the text of the initiative, PAE's Tier 1 report for the library, and this PowerPoint presentation. The initiative looks at how the city can prepare for grid failure scenarios. So it's pre-disaster, with a microgrid facility that includes local renewable energy generation, battery storage, and a controller. Those are the three elements of a microgrid. The controller manages energy production inputs from any source, prioritizes loads, provides grid interoperability, energy demand management, and the ability to island the system from the grid. That's its resilience piece. The initiative explores application of microgrids at the building, neighborhood, and district scales. And the benefits to the city are resilient facility operations, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, lower energy costs. And it also has benefits to the utility, a more resilient and efficient grid. Next slide, please. So the initiative was developed pre-pandemic. It's been in my mind for a couple of years, and and it's been in response to changing environmental conditions and city priorities. Next slide. The Energy Resiliency Initiative complements the city's overall resiliency strategy expressed in the Emergency Operations Plan. So this particular resilience initiative is for energy resiliency as a complement to that larger plan. It implements the strategic plan's a vision to prepare public spaces for a changing climate, and the emergency operations plan to fund emergency management operations, and the comprehensive plan to for the city to lead renewable energy development. Next slide, please. So this is who's involved with this. The city developed the initiative, the grant application, and is the project manager. PGE has an interest in success in a microgrid as it delivers and tests grid services. And the Energy Trust of Oregon, in which we partner in many ways, is a partnership here, both in terms of their subject matter expertise and also in a cash match. And PAE Consulting Engineers is a sort of rare local subject expert in microgrid development. Next slide. So within the city, it's been a multi-departmental effort where community development took the lead and worked with facilities with the Tier 1 application of a microgrid, and Public Works will be involved in the Tier 2, or where it implicates the public realm. Next slide. So briefly, 3 tiers, different scales. The library as an emergency operations center, or a backup emergency operations center to the Public Works location, offering redundancy to the city, and the IT server backup and heating and cooling for climate situations. And that will be consisting of rooftop and parking lot canopy generation and battery storage. And the public realm was more, where can you, with 25% of the city in public ownership, rights of way, parks, facilities, there's a good opportunity there to have energy generation, distributed energy resources, and the District 3 scale, a very conceptual idea about how you can scale this up to increase your resiliency benefits and sustainability impacts. Next slide, please. So for Tier 1, the library is the location, rooftop PV and parking lot PV, and to the right of the image is where the location of a generator currently is and would be expanded there for a new gas generator and the battery for the microgrid located there. Next slide, please. PAE's analysis of rooftop solar generation in this configuration of PV, both the community center and over the main building. Next slide. And this is the disposition of parking lot canopy, and there are trees represented here because trees are often in conflict with solar PV generation. So this is something that on this site we're conscious of, and the trade ally would be responsible for refining the where these panels go or how trees can be managed to reduce that conflict. Next slide. So basically, rooftop PV is more cost effective, but parking lot PV doubles the amount of energy generation here, which is significant for the resiliency goal. Next slide. The analysis on the library looked at various scenarios here, both in terms of the battery size and the photovoltaic arrays, the load profiles, whether you're serving just an emergency operations center functionality or whether you're also serving the building load itself, the greater library building and its uses, and different outage scenarios, 24 hours, 7 days, 14 days. These are looking at a range of circumstances in a climate change a scenario with wildfire and whatever that would bring the grid down, but also the Cascadia earthquake potential for long-term outages. So the conclusion was that the whole building resiliency strategy is the most economically feasible and achievable with a reasonable battery size coupled with the generator, the gas generator proposed for this site for resiliency in winter months. Next slide. So looking at examples of several other cities, this is the Beaverton Safety Center. A couple of years ago, PAE did the design for this, and it's now in full operation, and you can see in green the PV both on the parking lot and the building, and in red the battery. Next slide. This is just photo pictures of the size of the battery there in the bottom left. It's like a large container. Parking lot canopy comes in various designs, and rooftop is typical POE. Next slide. And Ashland also, at the beginning of the Oregon Department of Energy's grant for renewable energy projects, they won the grant last year in order to build a microgrid in their public services location, which the slide shows. The 6 blue squares are solar trackers, 14 kilowatts, I think, or 75 together, I guess, all installed, 75 kilowatts. And that's to run, provide resilient energy to run their pumps for gas pumping for emergency vehicles and so forth. Next slide. And the city of San Diego has an idea to have 8 microgrids, each attached to a separate city building, police, fire, and recreation centers. And I'll just read these benefits because they apply to this this microgrid as well that we're considering. Backup power during shutoff, leveraging new energy investments in disadvantaged communities, increased emergency capability for neighborhood services, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, access to EV charging, avoided energy costs, and implementing the city's climate action plan and the state's emission GHG reduction goals. Next slide. So next steps for Tier 1. PAE's report, which you had in your packet, is now in Energy Trust of Oregon's hands to get a trade ally to price that. So we don't have physical impact with this. This presentation is an update, an introduction. That will be coming in the fall when we get the results of the costs of what the basis of design is shown. Energy Trust of Oregon is a very important partner here, which takes PAE's technical research and evaluation and helps, sort of helps the city get to implement it, both in terms of the costing, who's doing what, and identifying funding options, the granting, tax measures, and also a variety of grant applications. We imagine that the results of this would go to the I&I committee for review and evaluation to see whether it has merit, whether the city should pursue this, and if so, then we imagine enrolling in PGE's distributed standby generation. This is a tariff Schedule 200 program where the city, they provide cash up front to help acquire the battery, which would be in city ownership, but they would maintain it through a contract for maintenance. And this is potentially, one of the city's initial efforts into solar generation, and we have a resiliency plan from last year. If you remember, Strategy 6 was to develop 50 megawatts of distributed energy resources by 2035, and this would be a beginning and a demonstration of that commitment by the city to be providing solar on the library and in the parking lot. Next slide, please. So Tier 2, this is exploratory, an idea where the resiliency plan goal is for rooftop solar, but this is looking at the substantial area that the city manages as a potential location for distributed energy resources, PV, on a pole, like this example, on a pole with a canopy, very little footprint since we don't have room in the city for ground-mounted solar. So we're not considering ground-mounted solar. And this is an example, and as the others that will follow, of how we could do that. Next slide. In Ashland, these are an array of solar trackers, each about 14 kilowatts of power. it's just back of sidewalk, but it's basically adjacent to the right-of-way. And you can imagine how the use of the right-of-way for locating this kind of power could be possible. Next slide. And this is the same solar tracker in a different array in an open space configuration. Again, whether in a park or adjacent to other open spaces, these solar trackers could generate considerable power for community resiliency. Next slide. And this is an existing resiliency for active transportation, which involves both solar generation on the roof and battery storage for charging micro-mobility like the bike that's shown here. Next slide. This is an example of a layered infrastructure, I'll call it. It's the proposed bridge over the railroad tracks behind the library to serve the Red Rock Creek Trail and the Tiger Lake Oswego Trail. And PAE did this design when we were designing the bridge as a way to look at how the bridge could also support solar generation. Next slide, please. This aerial photo and details show the bridge in various configurations that resulted from the private partnership with the Fields Apartments owner to design a bridge for that crossing. That was a contribution they made to the city, this design. And the bridge on the lower right image, you'll see the bridge lead to an area in the upper right-hand corner where we're imagining a resiliency hub for active transportation. We see that in the next slide, please. Yes. So here in white is identifying where distributed energy resources of the solar tracker variety could be placed in the right-of-way or in the park, the Brown Natural Area adjacent to the railroad, for example, on the bridge, or in a stormwater facility. And then in red are the locations of the resiliency hubs, the private one for the Fields Apartments in the upper left, and the mobility hub at the end of the bridge is indicated in the last slide. Next slide. So we're looking at the existing Fields Apartments, the 5 buildings in the upper portion here, and in the middle is the clubhouse that's labeled Resiliency Hub. And the idea is that in combination with the public realm distributed energy resource generation and rooftop solar on these buildings could power a resilient, with battery storage, hub there for the use by the affordable housing residents. And the lower in the picture is the resiliency hub for active transportation, and 2 buildings identified for the future development there. Thinking that the resiliency hub could be integrated in that development, which is subject to a plan development review eventually. Next slide, please. So that's one potential application for a microgrid in sort of a neighborhood configuration. But there would be others in the city that council could consider either applying additional microgrids to, or in lieu of, if they prove to be more valuable, like water facilities. The water pump needs resilient power. There's a generator there, but for long-term outages, say in an earthquake situation, perhaps the renewable energy fueled battery through a microgrid would be useful. And distributed energy resources in greenways, parks and park facilities, resilient park facilities, public works, and parking lots are in the public realm. City Hall police facilities and parking lots, our new campus here in downtown, would be a good candidate for, like the Beaverton Safety Center, for microgrid development. Next slide, please. So attached to the AIS was the PAE Energy Resilience Report. I'm sorry, we're in Tier 2. We expect that there will be, by the end of the contract, at the end of this month, the design by PAE summarizing these options and these resiliency hubs. And then we would take that result, if positive, and engage with the fields departments to see if they would be interested in, and they already are aware of this and indicated they would be interested. But this would be sharing the results with them, and then using this information to apply for a planning grant to develop the project. Again, this has the potential for meeting some of the 50 megawatts of installed distributed energy resources that would be the climate action planning goal. Next slide. So the district microgrid, this is the most conceptual tier. Not a lot of example of this to go on. We'd be breaking some ground here. Originally conceived as the Hudson River Core District, which includes the Fields property, and could be expanded to include this area. A study by the Sustainable City Year U of O MBA program last year sort of didn't rate the feasibility of this area very highly, in part primarily because of the multiple user character of it. A single user microgrid, like city ownership at the library, single owner, single building, very manageable load allocations. You can imagine here if everyone, individual property owners had individual PV arrays, load requirements, but controllers are becoming more and more able to handle the complexity. So this is a fast-moving field, and to be able to manage something like this is rather difficult at the moment. So, next slide, please. We can look at other potential district-scale microgrid locations that avoid the multiple user, like Macerich, Pac Trust, and Clean Water Services, all having large land and building inventories that, if they found this valuable, we would want to share the results of this investigation of district-scale microgrids with them to see whether or not they would be interested in pursuing the resiliency and sustainability benefits of a microgrid, and then perhaps write a grant that would be specifically applicable to a district that was more feasible. Next slide, please. Just aerial depiction of each of those, showing significant rooftop in Pac Trust, and the large redevelopment site at Macerich, which includes the mall, which has no PV on it, I don't think. On the other hand, the CWS district does have an existing solar array, and they could augment that. And we have equitable goals in what we do, so the Greenberg neighborhood would stand to benefit through a microgrid there. Next slide. So next steps for Tier 3. We're expecting a PAE to deliver a high-level concept by the end of their contract that we can then share with district stakeholders and look at a grant application potentially that would flow from that. Again, significant opportunity here to help meet our distributed energy resource goals of the Climate Action Plan. Next slide, please. So we hope that this introduction raises questions in your mind, and that you would consider supporting a construction grant and utility agreements for the library in Tier 1, and that the public realm microgrid concept involves how the city imagines using its right-of-way and its facilities for distributed energy resource generation to meet climate goals. And Tier 3, one of the district that we control as a city could be centered on the downtown, where we have the urban plaza, we have the senior center, we have the library. If you draw the boundary, it includes the library, and even including the Fields property in sort of a crescent shape there. And this has the benefit of providing a context for incremental microgrid development, so that a planning horizon of 2035, funders and the utilities can see where the city can go, how ambitious they are in creating distributed energy resources, sustainability, and resilience. Thank you. Next slide. Questions?
That's a lot of information. Our Council President who?
Thank you, Mayor.
And Karina Hirschberg will join me, because I know, Councilor Hu, you will have technical questions, I'm sure, from the report that was part of the AIS.
Well,
don't hold back.
No, is it on? Actually, my questions may not be relevant. If I apologize. So how resilient are the new power generators at the library? The 500.
The 500 kilowatt gas one.
So is it going to survive an earthquake?
Kevin can also have an opinion about that, but let's say there was a Cascadia earthquake that limited the supply of gas. Either broken pipelines or bridges are out, so you can't get that. There would be an on-site supply, but that would be of limited duration. But together, you could work both the battery storage and the gas storage that you have to have the best resilient outcome. So, whereas you want to address that?
Well, I guess I was just gonna. I think add to it is I think what you're touching on is actually is kind of that bigger question of resiliency, right? And as Gary mentioned, the energy resiliency is only one part of that discussion. Beaverton Public Safety Center as an example, since that was a new construction building, Cascadia was one of the big concerns with that, right? And so it was built to a seismic resilience level that will withstand it, and so the system is within that. So I think one of the considerations at the library, if there's different kind of things that we try to be resilient to, and unfortunately we are seeing more and more of those happen, right? So snowstorms, right, is one of them that would provide resiliency. The wildfire outages that we need to see, right? So there's resiliency to that. When it gets to the conversations about the earthquake, there's sort of a second part that would need to be answered around that, around the seismic resiliency of the building and all the systems kind of within that, which is sort of, would be a recommended kind of partnered effort with it, but can be done independently just because we do have sort of the lower impact but more frequent events of snowstorms and wildfires, whereas the very high impact but hopefully very low likely, in our lifetimes, kind of one of the seismic piece of that. If that answers the question.
So I guess what you're implying is that if the building crumbles, it doesn't really matter.
And I think that's, again, and I'm as not a structural engineer, I wouldn't be able to speak to that, and so that would be something that I think follow-on studies, if Cascadia is kind of the primary goal of the city, then that would be the structural engineering evaluation of the building for it, because if the building crumbles, then sort of the rest of it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying this is a great idea. I'm just wondering, we have plan A, plan B, but I don't know if we'll have a plan C, but maybe maybe we have to look deeper into that at this point. But that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Councillor Singh?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Gary. My main question, I think, is around just like community engagement, how much community engagement has taken place around the microgrid study, as well as the other aspect I was thinking about was certifications around like things like LEED certification for neighborhood development. Is that something that we're pursuing? I think there's like a lot of potential to, you know, use the microgrid at the library, for example, to use this as a demonstration site for our community members and for other jurisdictions to learn from. So I think I'm just trying to break the barrier in terms of like bringing more community into this conversation, because I just don't feel like there's been enough just community dialogue. So I don't know if that's taking place or if you have.
Well, I thank you very much for bringing that point up, because this grant hasn't to date had any engagement. As you might imagine, it's an idea we're trying to find what's feasible. So we don't really know anything to share at this point, but soon we will. And if the city decides to, you know, pursue a tier 1, 2, or 3 effort, then I think that's really a time to bring everyone in, and also after the fact use it for educational purposes, for a demonstration to show city leadership in climate action. So thank you.
Youth Councillor Vogel, any questions?
I did have a question and it slipped my mind, so if it comes back, I will.
Sounds good. So I think just to be clear, you're looking for guidance on if we support tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 to continue to look forward and explore them. Is that the guidance that you're looking for today?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And I don't know that we've necessarily had that discussion yet. We've had some questions. So I'd like to hear from the councilors. I mean, I think the library microgrid is a really great initial opportunity to see city level how it would work. Also, you know, when you drive and you get to park under solar, it helps keep your car cooler and things like that too. So I think there's a mutual benefit. Is anyone opposed to tier 1 or have concerns? No? Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, so definitely not a concern, but I would concur, Mayor, with your comments about definitely tier 1 and moving forward with that and supporting it.
Okay. Let's move on to tier 2, public realm. I think there's a wide variety of different options there, just as far as public right-of-way or participating and partnering with groups such as affordable housing. Is there general support to continue to explore and move that concept forward? Seeing a lot of head nodding. Yes, Council President Hu.
So for tier 2, would that also help with the emergency operation, just in case the power generator is offline? Maybe we can get power from public solar panel elsewhere into our emergency operation center. Is that
well, yes,
possibility?
You could direct the solar energy generated and stored to whatever load that you want. Conceptually, anyway, you could do that.
Right.
So whether you're supporting the Emergency Operations Center with solar trackers that are in Brown Natural area, or whether you're allocating that to the Fields Department, affordable housing, there should be that flexibility. We don't really know what the constraints are on that sort of redirection. That was part of our discussion with PG this morning, actually, about what their system, what the architecture of their system to support this initiative would be. And so we're learning about that. But in concept, yes, the distributed energy resources the city would build could further the resilience at the library.
Yeah.
For the emergency.
Yeah, I support it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of detail questions that we don't have answers to, but just looking very generally if this is something we support to continue looking into. So I saw a lot of head nods to move forward with Tier 2. Tier 3, district microgrid. Questions? Yep, Councilor Wolf?
Well, I think this is in Assistant Manager Tritch knows this, as I was trying to just process what the report said, trying to gather feedback. So I guess I'm interested and curious, trying to support the best that Tigard can be moving forward, but I'm trying to understand, will better information come forward in this final report that helps better inform the council on how we would move forward with Tier 3? And to Councilor Singh's question of that community engagement and feedback, do we have better technical and understanding to then share? And you said that, Mary, just even, we're learning as we go, so.
Yes, I think there would be an advantage to having an actual district that has boundaries and constituent parts that we could that will be evaluated by PAE's report, and therefore bring it out of the cloud and down to ground. I think that would be very helpful.
Add to that a little bit. So one way to kind of think through the 3 tiers is both the size of it, right? Single building, and then a neighborhood, and then a district. I would also think of it in terms of timelines. The single building is very technologically feasible today. Obviously, we did it in Beaverton a couple years ago, right? So that's something that we have the technology, we have just even within the utility tariffs, there's a path forward for it. That's something that can be done today. And then that timeline kind of increases as we go through the tiers. The Tier 2 would be in many ways the first of its kind in sort of the region, not necessarily the nation, but within the region, right? So there's just more technical considerations, but then also human elements. I think your points about community, there's some really interesting community questions that come up with that kind of idea of shared resources and shared energy resources, right? And so that one's a little bit longer timeline. And then the last one of the district, that is very much the future of kind of where our energy systems are going nationally, but it's very much, we're at that leading edge of it. And so that gets into that longer timeline. And so part of what our report's looking at is, again, the way that we're structuring the content is with that, looking towards what could, you be able to go and get funding for and build today, and then what is probably going to be longer conversations, within the city and within funding sources and stuff like that. And that's kind of how the tiers are structured.
Yeah, Councilor Singh.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, I just wanted to bring up at the state level, they recently passed in the last legislative session, Community Resilience Hub funding. So I think there is a lot of opportunity around this, and I think there's, I really like the Mobility Hub resiliency and just the idea of Resilience Hub in general, because it's happening funding is coming down at the state level as well as at the federal level, and there's just a lot of opportunity to take advantage of that and leverage that. So yeah, that's all. I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great time to get into it and see the way that we can support our community and potentially lead forward. So I think I hear general yes support on all 3 to continue exploring and understanding and bring in robust community engagement along the way. Councilor Shaw, did you have anything to add? Nope. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
The next item on our agenda tonight is a climate goal update, and we have Community Development Director Kenny Asher and Assistant City Manager Emily Tritch here to present on this item.
Did you want a break? You're very patient.
It's a lot of information coming at us, but it's all super interesting.
There are a lot more words coming your way now.
Just check, does anybody want a break, or all right, we will continue on.
Your stamina is impressive. Madam Mayor, Council, I'm Kenny Asher, your Community Development Director. It's nice to see you as always. Youth Councilor Vogel, it's nice to see you too. Nice to meet you, kind of. I need to start with the bad news. You may know this, but over the July 4th holiday, the Earth had the 3 hottest days ever recorded since instrumental measurements began in the 1850s. One climate scientist told the Washington Post that last week's global average temperatures were likely the highest in 125,000 years. Another climate scientist, Bill McGuire, called the record heat totally unprecedented and terrifying. There's no way to do this report without setting that context, I'm afraid. Good news, the city of Tigard does have a goal to address climate change, and there is action happening. I've been asked tonight to represent my colleagues in making this report to you. The 3 departments that have activities to share are the library and public works and community development. I'm going to run through what's been happening. If you have questions, Directors Rager and Lube may be better able to answer some of your questions. And I'll invite our executive sponsor on this goal, Assistant City Manager Trich, to join me for the Q&A as well. Let me begin with the library. To begin with, the library's grounds are now more energy efficient. The decision was made to replace the previous water and care-intensive landscaping in front of the building with native plants, including a rock garden that requires no additional watering. And very much in line with Strategy 2.4 under the council goal, which is about educating the community on lowering their emissions, the library has begun offering programs in solarizing, electronic tax filing, and also a repair fair. And the collections group has also supported that strategy by offering bike locks now for checkout, which makes it easier for folks to travel to the library emissions-free. And through the free checkout of laptops, instruments, games, by sharing those items instead of consuming them, we reduce landfill waste and the associated methane emissions. That's the library report. Now let's turn to Public Works, and we'll begin with the Parks Division, which has been very focused on pollinator habitat. That group received a grant to restore pollinator habitat at Lasich Park, and they are also handing out pollinator seed packets to the community that attends parks and recreation events. The team has changed its mowing practices at Cook Family Park to create natural swale areas that are also populated with native pollinator plants. And also at that park, the team's now using recycled water on some sports fields, parking lot plantings, and in the butterfly garden. 2 new pumps will be installed, increasing the volume of recycled water for use in those areas, helping with water conservation overall. In the natural areas that Parks maintains, the team has been removing invasive species and testing battery-powered maintenance equipment to reduce fuel consumption, exhaust, and noise pollution. And finally, to mention that Parks has planted 40,000 new trees this year, I understand, expects to plant another 40,000 next year. If you don't know, trees are important in helping with carbon sequestration, capturing carbon, and also with the heat island effect. And the division has also started monitoring traps for the emerald ash borer pest, which should help prevent losses to our local tree canopy and habitat. Unsurprisingly, the water division has been focused on conservation, again, by communicating and educating the public per the council strategy. That division has made water leak detection kits available at community event booths, both in English and Spanish. By encouraging residents to test for leaks, it helps prevent unnecessary water loss. A pilot project is also underway to do advanced metering infrastructure with about 250 customers, which also helps to better detect leaks remotely. Actually, that's what that does. It detects leaks remotely, which has the additional benefit of reducing vehicular trips that are necessary with manual meter reading. In terms of habitat conservation, we have the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Program, which allows the city to store water from the river during winter months when water is abundant, which leaves water in the river during summer months when water levels are lower and temperatures are warmer, which is hard on native fish populations. And the Water Division is helping with energy conservation as well. By participating in PGE's Energy Partner on Demand program, we reduce our power load at our plants at peak times, and we also qualify for thousands of dollars that we can put toward electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And Tigard works closely with Lake Oswego to conduct our water operations as energy efficiently as possible. Switching now over to the engineering group. We have the story of the Reservoir 18 project to share, where considerable effort was made to keep all the cut material on site, so no dirt was needed to be hauled off site for disposal, which decreased truck traffic, minimized greenhouse gas emissions, and also saved about $1 million for that project. A project that's also getting a sort of green roof, which will decrease the amount of stormwater runoff that will be generated, which of course helps our creeks and streams. In the Stormwater Division, the practice is now to use only native plants in water quality facilities, and thanks to a new Vactor truck, to reuse water during the workday, which also lowers the amount of turbid water that is returned to the system. The new Vactor uses less water, requires less staff time for refilling water tanks. And the Wastewater Division also has improved equipment, a lateral launch camera that enables the crews to minimize trips, minimize fuel and emissions, now because they're able to do more work in the field and not back at the office. And finally, in the Public Works area, we can share that the Streets Division has gone to a recycled asphalt mix, which minimizes the amount of new oil needed for new asphalt and reduces waste by reusing some old asphalt. And another little known fact from that division, I think, the division recycles all of its out of commission aluminum signs. These are melted down and then the material is used again, and other street signs are repurposed, so we use fewer blanks. We have to buy fewer new blanks. The Street Division also oversees the Street Tree Program, which plants 40 to 60 new street trees each year. And like in parks, those trees are removing carbon dioxide from the air to provide fresh oxygen, improving Tigard's air quality. And then last, we're going to go to my department, Community Development. I'm not going to talk about a few things. I'm not going to talk about our land use or transportation plans, nor the Resiliency Initiative, nor the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities work. These all have their own, have come to you under their own heading, and I'm going to try not to repeat what you've heard tonight and recently. But there are several other initiatives underway in community development, all in support of your goal, all part of the department's commitment to refocus our work through the lens of carbon responsibility. That's the best way that we could think to make the climate crisis real and actionable, especially around buildings and transportation. Both those sectors are planned and regulated in my department. Together, they account for 94% of all of Tigard's emissions. And when we say carbon responsible, we're trying to shift the frame from the climate, which is very large and out there, to our personal and political choices about emissions, which are very much in our power to change. So I'll start by sharing the coalitions that Tigard is now a part of through my department and some of the achievements so far. We can take a little satisfaction in knowing that we helped the statewide passage of the Resilient Buildings Package through our membership and participation in the Zero Coalition's Policy Advisory Committee. House Bills 3409 and 3630 compiled more than a dozen bills with a focus on community resiliency, adaptation, and reducing the state's statewide greenhouse gas emissions in the building sector. That package will bring heat pumps to more buildings, many, many more buildings, money for building energy retrofits, and rebates for medium and heavy-duty trucks, electric trucks, and a number of other things that I don't have time to go into. In anticipation of that package passing, Tigard agreed to sign on as an observing city on the Advancing Building Performance Standards in Oregon proposal. That's a consortium studying building performance standards. We're now positioned with a seat at the table to review policy impact analyses that will be developed by Earth Advantage, the New Buildings Institute, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. We'll be able to determine the technical and policy applicability for Tigard, and will provide input on future statewide building performance standard policies that may impact Tigard. We don't have building performance standards in this state yet, but with the recent legislative action, we're getting closer, and we've signed on to a grant as an observing city that we hope comes through. Along with Councillor Singh, Tigard's participating in the Stand.Earth's local government electrification workshops, and likewise we're involved with many local governments in the region around the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, which is both a Metro and DEQ-led effort to develop new regional and state climate action plans. These will open the gates for billions of dollars in new funding for GHG reducing projects in the years ahead. And the last consortium I want to mention is the Community Green Tariff Working Group, which we've been attending since March. The background on this one: 2 years ago, House Bill 2021 set GHG reduction targets for utilities and created the opportunity for local governments and electric companies to develop community-wide non-emitting power generation. Actually mandated that. Several local governments, including Tigard, are working with the PUC and PGE to determine the best way forward to structure agreements, understand rates, do rate making, and figure out public participation and an umbrella tariff that would drive down emissions from local energy production. More to come there. SolSmart. In terms of programming, I'll start with SolSmart, which was introduced to us by Councillor Singh a few months ago. That's a program that makes rooftop solar installations more affordable. Our department is completing a required solar permitting checklist, and we'll be posting it on a new solar landing page, which should be enough to earn us a bronze designation in that program. We can and will do more in our inspection practices and our zoning code, which will allow us to meet silver and we think gold designations in the not too distant future, and it's possible in 2024 we might be able to achieve platinum. We would be the first community in the nation to do that. Surprisingly to us, it looks somewhat attainable, especially if we follow through on the resiliency microgrid package at the library. That would be a huge step in that platinum direction. So we'll see. Another idea we're working on is an ETO service provider letter. ETO is the Energy Trust of Oregon. We're working together to create a letter that would require most land use applicants to meet with a representative of the ETO to find out if their project is eligible for energy saving programs. Service provider letters are how we work with Clean Water Services. These are other agencies that regulate by way of conferring and consulting and sometimes allowing certain things to happen or not happen. In this case, we would be connecting developers and homeowners with these offerings early in their development timeline, not to require anybody to participate, but just to require a meeting with Energy Trust so applicants could decide if they want to make use of ETO incentives. Another one that I'm excited about is kind of goes under the name of socializing carbon responsibility. We've now engaged with 2 marketing professionals, a writer and a photographer, to produce stories and online content celebrating carbon responsible work that's happening around town. That team will help us highlight city initiatives like SolSmart and the green projects happening in the Triangle, at the library, and in the neighborhoods, and we'll also be highlighting work that our neighbors are doing, or your neighbors are doing. Home Energy Score is a program that we're exploring along with the Oregon Department of Energy. That's a program that uses a rating system that estimates a home's energy efficiency for prospective home buyers, which can incentivize efficiency upgrades in the residential building stock, from which about 1/4 of our emissions originate. The cities of Bend, Portland, Milwaukee, and Hillsborough have adopted this program. It's mandatory in those places. Tigard is continuing to explore its benefits. It's something that we might be bringing to you in the future. I'd like to talk about some policy pegs now on this goal that we've implemented into our financial programs. 2 new requirements of our vertical housing development zone program are now the completion of a free early design assistance meeting, again with the Energy Trust of Oregon, and an estimate of the building's energy use intensity, or EUI. Similarly, manufacturers are now required to consult with the Energy Trust to be eligible for our enterprise zone tax abatement programs. This was low-hanging fruit. We have control over those programs, and these are just consultations. I'm happy also to report that Washington County, with Tigard's initiative and support, established a CPACE financing program to lower the cost of financing for energy upgrades and renewable energy components in development projects. That's countywide. To my knowledge, it hasn't yet been put to use on a Tigard project, but the program's still fairly new, and we know about it, we're familiar with it, we can promote it. Chances are savvy developers will be coming to us wanting to do that. That did happen about a year ago, which is what got the ball rolling on that program, but I don't think that developer followed through. Finally, as part of the Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, our department began planning for an energy efficiency conservation strategy, which makes us eligible for new block grant funding. That application is due in January, and the likeliest need for the funding is to supplement River Terrace 2.0 planning to ensure that the district development is carbon responsible. It's in the neighborhood of $100,000. Should be very attainable for us. I included in the AIS that we are also seeking to update our 2022 Climate Action Report, which created a baseline measurement of Tigard emissions. You remember that report, it was just last year, but it was based on 2019 data, which was the best data that we had. So 4 years later, we're hoping to get a new set of numbers based on more recent data to see what our emissions totals are now. Thank you. With that, I'd like to invite Emily Trich, either from her seat over there or to up here, to join me to take any questions that the council might have.
Y'all are busy. Are there questions? Yeah, Council President Hu?
I have a couple questions. So for the smart water meter program, where are we at right now, and what's the end goal? Are we going to implement it based on some data we're collecting, or?
On that one, I'll ask Brian Rager. Or I don't know the answer to that. I think, Emily, do you?
Right, I don't know that Public Works Director Rager is on, so I'll do my best, and we'll be happy to follow up. So we have two smart water meter programs going on right now. We have the AMI, the Automated Metering Infrastructure pilot that is just being installed now. There's about 250 residences, I think primarily along 99W, where that infrastructure will be installed, and that allows for dynamic meter reading. And so if there's a leak on your property, or if there's some unusual activity, the city is able to notify that resident straight away instead of waiting until you get your bill or until something else happens. That's been rolled out in other cities to great success and helps in conservation. A similar and related program, and where I have a bit of results to share with you, is leak detection installed associated with some of our hydrants and water lines citywide. In fact, I learned from our water supervisor that this is Tigard's deployment is the largest in the nation, and we've only just started receiving data. As of last week, I was made aware of 2 fairly large leaks that were identified, and because of this technology, our team is able to go out like surgeons, and instead of ripping up a whole roadway trying to identify a source of a leak, can go in and minimize the impact to the surface, to the pavement, anything else, and remedy a leak.
Thank you. That's very impressive. I have one more question. So recently, I got an e-bike, and that's just one of the greatest things I ever got. I can go further and go to places that I've never seen before just on my bike. Anyway, but when I would purchase the bike, I was very surprised to get charged a $15 bike tax the state imposes, and I think that's an impediment. So I know the city is piloting, or maybe it's in the process of doing e-bike program for the affordable housing unit.
Yes.
So are there are talks about other e-bike program? Can you share what other ideas the city is thinking about in terms of giving incentive for e-bikes?
I can share that it's happening in other cities. Denver being the most prominent example of a city that has subsidized e-bike purchases. It's caught on in other places. It's proved to be extraordinarily popular. To my knowledge, it's not something that we've talked about yet. We haven't budgeted for it. Part of it is infrastructure. As you know, it's a two-part problem to solve. Like, the technology of the e-bike is phenomenal. I've used them myself. But if you're still riding on Hall Boulevard all the time and trying to navigate Greenberg Road, some of the infrastructure that we have around town, it's not entirely safe. It's not safe at all in some places. So we have a grant that we've been waiting for ODOT to approve for a long time, our micro-mobility, e-mobility grant, which is going to help us look at the infrastructure problem, and not just around infrastructure, it's curb use and everything else. But perhaps as part of that process, I would suspect that we will start to talk about whether we can get prepared for a program like that. But the short answer to your question is we haven't really talked about that yet. Not very much.
Okay, thank you.
If you want to bring it up to the budget committee, I will come and testify in support. Because
I mean, I understand the dangerous condition you're talking about, but I think e-bike has given me the courage to face those challenges, because if I'm in a sketchy situation, I just juice up my power and just get out of there as fast as I could. So I think that's a great incentive to encourage people to use bikes even in somewhat unsafe conditions.
I guess I should also mention, we've talked, it's been a few years and COVID got in the way, but we were talking about a bike share program, bringing a bike share pilot program to Tigard. Many of these bike share programs now are using e-bikes, which is another perfect sort of application of that technology. And there are companies that would very much like to do that here with us. But again, we all have to be ready for that. And I include Public Works in that kind of decision, and there's not quite the readiness yet. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, I think a bike share program could be kind of cool, and using the e-bikes, it reminds me of a conversation. I can't remember where I was in the last couple of months where it happened, but even car rental companies were talking about how they are adding electric vehicles to their fleet because it actually provides an opportunity for a lot of people who wouldn't normally buy one to use one, and that's their first entry into whether or not that's something that's feasible for them. So it could be the same with a bike share program and an e-bike to test it out to see if it could be cool for them, but definitely food for thought in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to chime in to mention two things just briefly. That we did win a grant for the e-bike lending library at the 2 affordable housing units, and so that'll be a neat opportunity for folks to have the exposure. And also at our Move for May events, we do sometimes partner with e-bike providers and others, and that can give community members the opportunity to try out e-bikes and other technology, and maybe get them excited and want to make that investment themselves.
Are there any additional questions or comments? All right. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Asher.
Thank you.
We don't have any non-agenda items tonight, so we will move on to the administrative report with City Manager Reimer.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, good evening, Mayor, councilors, members of the community, and my teammates. I want to start on behalf of all of our teammates here, about 350 people work for our organization, welcoming our new youth counselor, Vogel, as well. We're excited to work with you, and all of us should be seen as a resource for you, just like the other counselors, so don't hesitate to reach out to us with questions or ideas, different comments you may have. So we look forward to working with you.
Perfect, thank you. I do as well.
Absolutely. I'm not sure everyone knows, but for the community, our second annual Music Fest that's being held by an outside organization is this weekend. It's their second one, as I mentioned. This year, though, it'll be larger than last. And so we've been working closely with them to really understand what are the impacts to our downtown, to traffic on 99, and throughout our community by closing down portions of the downtown street system on Main and Tigard. To really understand what that means, so we'll be observing that. I want to thank Emily and many members of our Public Works team, Brian Rager and Rick and Tiffany and Nicole and Joe, probably others that I'm not recognizing, for their efforts. They've spent countless hours working with the organizers just to make sure that we're all on the same page and understanding all the different dynamics of what we're talking about in terms of the event that they're bringing forward, as well as just the logistics to street closures and the safety being paramount to everything we do. So in addition to that, our police department is also looking at having a presence to understand how the event is working. So we see it as an opportunity to have something for our community and others to visit our community, as well as really understanding what it means for our downtown and if and how our downtown can handle these to be successful and vibrant. Speaking of events, I also want to thank the Chamber, as referenced a couple times already tonight in the early comments, just about the importance of the farmers market. You know, as we've talked about Universal Plaza, and I'll have a few more comments, you know, there's a lot of good things happening there, and the Chamber's annual event of the farmers market is really something that brings that place to life. We had a chance to visit there again this weekend, and it was just nice to see just the people feeling good, the weather being nice, and so thanks to the Chamber for their continued partnership in that. And then speaking of Universal Plaza, just a quick update, primarily with the water feature. We continue to acknowledge that the expectations that we established for the community we have not met, and we're working hard to rectify that. OTL, so the company that you heard about 2 weeks ago, OTL is out again this week, and I believe they arrived early, actually today instead of tomorrow, and so the individual that was here immediately went to the park and started to do some of the work that they're working on with the system and the water chemistry. At the same time, our team is doing what they can to train up and be ready, so once we have the mechanical and chemistry issues where we need them, that we're able to turn on the fountain. I still can't report a date today, but hopefully we can in the very near future that these pieces are finally coming together where we can get the water feature on. Obviously the council will be the first to know, and we will do our best to get everything out to the community so they're aware that the feature is on and operating for them. So that's the latest on Universal Plaza, and we will keep you informed every meeting along the way. And that concludes my report for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have an executive session scheduled. So the Tigard City Council is entering into an executive session to discuss real property negotiations under ORS 192-6602E. All discussions are confidential, and those present may disclose nothing from the session. Representatives of the news media are allowed to attend executive sessions as provided by ORS 192-6604, but must not disclose any information discussed. No executive session may be held for the purpose of taking any final action or making any final decision. Executive sessions are closed to the public. The council will adjourn immediately after the executive session. Thank you so much. Good night, Tigard.